stood for Wokingham again in 2017 in the general election on a personal and a party manifesto to leave the European Union. And I'm very frustrated that we still haven't got out of the European Union, which we should have done. Yes. The previous Parliament and this Parliament has legislated to leave the European Union. We first of all, by a very large majority, legislated to send the letter of withdrawal. And that means in European law, now as of the 31st of October, we will be out of the European Union. Nothing else need happen. We have sent in the letter and that operates under the treaty. We then, by a smaller majority, passed the European Union Withdrawal Act, which confirms our departure in United Kingdom law. It also transfers into United Kingdom law all current European law.
Yes.
And the important point of doing that is it means that the day we leave, there's no legal change other than the removal of the superior power of the European Court. But it means that everything then is United Kingdom law, which we can improve, amend or repeal as we see fit. And one of the main reasons we want to leave the European Union is that there is a very big body of law, including tax law and borders law and benefits law, which we cannot change, and we wish to make changes to it.
Brexit party could come into the game and...
well, that will depend on what manifesto the Conservatives put forward and what attitude the Brexit party had, but one would hope that all forces in favour of Brexit would organise themselves to get a good result. What is very clear from current polling is that the Labour opposition is in a very weak position because the public hasn't warmed to the principal party of opposition. Trying to delay or prevent us leaving the European Union
it's very damaging for them.
Without having a positive policy on what they really want to do. And so they're in a mess because they don't know whether they want a second referendum, whether they just want to cancel Brexit altogether, whether they want to propose some kind of new deal. And it's that lack of positive agenda and the disagreements between them that has meant they are now very low in the opinion polls, so they are in a difficult position.
The Brexit is something that maybe you have been defending since quite a long time, or at least getting out of the European Union.
Yes, indeed. I mean, as a very young man, one of the first votes I cast was in the referendum of 1975 as whether we should stay in the European Economic Community or not. And I voted to come out of the European Economic Community on that occasion. Why did I do that? Well, because I think I was lied to by the Labour government and the principal spokesman on the stay-in side, because they told me it was a common market and it didn't in any way damage the sovereign right of the United Kingdom to choose her own laws and taxes and borders and so forth. I read the Treaty of Rome and it didn't seem to me that's what the Treaty of Rome said.
Yes.
And so I voted against on the grounds that I thought we were going to be taken on a journey to more and more powers of self-government being taken over by Brussels. I accepted the verdict of the British people, and for the next 20 years, I suppose, I lived with us being in the so-called common market. But then when we saw a very aggressive set of treaties coming forward under the Labour government, Nice, Amsterdam, and then Lisbon, I and others like me said this is completely different from the so-called common market which British people had voted for in 1975. So we started campaigning for another think about all this, because it was a different proposition. We first of all had to win the battle of the euro, which we won. And I was very active in that. I wrote a couple of books explaining why the euro would be very bad for the United Kingdom and probably for quite a number of the other member states in it.
It's indeed for France.
And I took that around the country, and there are others with me, and we managed to run a very successful campaign. And we persuaded the British people by a big majority in opinion polls to be against joining the euro. And that was sufficient to force both Mr. Blair and Mr. Major into promising that they would not take us into the euro without a referendum. And once I and others secured that promise, we knew that we'd save the pound, because the British public was something like 20% in favour of the euro and 80% against the euro. And so we knew that we got a very good public lock
Okay.
on the currency, and then winning the currency argument made me stay on in politics and want to complete the process, because I felt that once we as a country had decided not to join the euro, we were not joining what became the main issue of the project,
Yes.
the main driver of the federal scheme, that it was a bit silly to stay in it. We might as well admit that we didn't want to be part of the federal scheme, and it would be neater if we didn't stay in. So that led I and others to then say, why don't we have a referendum on our membership as a whole, which we finally secured from Mr. Cameron in the coalition government period. No, I was quite young, and I mean the reason I got involved and came strongly to the view we shouldn't stay in was that I was working as an investment and economic analyst as a young man in the city.
Okay.
And they gave me the job of researching it.
Yes.
And so I went off and did a forecast. And my forecast for the economic progress of the United Kingdom in the common market was poor.
Yes.
Because I ran the numbers on what was going to happen to the balance payments, which was bound to go heavily negative, which it did, and what was going to happen to our financial contributions to the budget, which were bound to go up a lot, which they did. And I presented this work, and I then discovered that that wasn't what the business had in mind, because they were very pro staying in the common market. But I still went off and voted against it because I felt it was wrong.
Did you foresee the Maastricht Treaty and all the other, Lisbon and all?
I didn't foresee the full extent of it, no. But I did take seriously the statement in the Treaty of Rome that they wanted ever closer union.
Yes.
And I did take seriously that they were already then discussing currency schemes. They
Yes.
were talking about something called the snake, and that evolved into the exchange rate mechanism. And that was one of the main reasons why I didn't trust the idea and felt that this would not be what I wanted for my country.
Yes. And you had seen well.
And look at the damage the exchange rate mechanism did to us, because eventually I lost the battle of the exchange rate mechanism with the few others that fought it. So we tried to keep our country out of it. Eventually we were taken in, and then of course it created a boom and a bust, a really very nasty crisis, with a big loss of output and a loss of jobs, and a lot of economic damage.
Now, one thing which is difficult to convince the people about in France is the fact that so people are afraid of leaving the EU because they think that if we leave the EU, it's going to be worse after some time. And we cannot defend ourselves, we cannot resist against China, against America. And how do you see the future of the UK outside of the EU? In which way do you think the UK out of the EU will be more prosperous? And
No, I think we'll be better off. It will depend on what policies we choose to follow, because
Yes.
it would obviously require sensible economic policies, but if we have decent economic policies, we will be better off. And why do I say this? Well, I do quite a bit of forecasting of these things. Over the years, I've been a commentator on these matters, and I did correctly forecast that the exchange rate mechanism would be very disastrous for the UK economy. I did correctly forecast that there would be euro crises and that the euro scheme would be very tough on the deficit countries and the poorer countries in the scheme, because there isn't a proper transfer mechanism within the euro scheme. And I did warn about the banking crash that we had in 2009-10, and could see that there was an excess of credit, and then worse, that they deflated the excess credit far too quickly and brought great banks down, which they needn't have done. So I've been forecasting these things. What does my forecast say for here? Well, if we leave as planned on the 31st of October,
yes.
I am saying that the government needs to have an immediate reflationary budget, and I proposed 11 billion sterling of extra public spending.
Yes.
And 11 billion of tax cuts, so 22 billion, 1% of GDP stimulus.
Yes.
Even now, one might think it needs to be a little bit more, because there's quite a big world slowdown going on. There's a world manufacturing recession underway, so you certainly need a stimulus. And then going forwards, you get the continuous benefit from not having to make all those payments into the European Union budget that you don't get back. You get benefits from freer trade with non-EU sources. There will be some loss if the EU insists on a tariff-based trade in agriculture and cars with the EU, but most of our trade with the EU at the moment wouldn't be tariffable anyway under World Trade rules, because services are never attracting tariffs at all, and we mainly sell services. But there'll be some disadvantage from that. So I put it all together, and I come up with a 1% boost to the economy in the first year.
Wow.
With the right policies put in place, net. And thereafter, I would expect to get a small increase in the annual growth rate, not very big, depending on how brave we want to be on tax policy and trade policy and so forth. But I think there will be a general benefit from going for a lower tariff model, and the government has decided to do that. And so we will actually be cutting tariffs or removing tariffs altogether on a large number of items that currently attract tariff under the EU tariff.
Okay. So economically...
And one thing we would do, for example, is in order to encourage more manufacturing here, you take off all the tariffs on components coming in, because at the moment we have to charge tariffs on some components coming in from non-EU sources. Well, we certainly don't want to impose tariffs on EU sources, so let's take them off everybody. And then we're allowed to do that under World Trade rules.
What is your view on the Irish border, Irish issue? So is it something...
An entirely made-up issue.
Okay. So for you, there are easy way to solve this?
There isn't a problem.
Okay.
So I mean, it's already a complicated border. It's a VAT border, because there are different rates and different incidents of VAT each side of the border. It's an excise border, different rates of excise on tobacco and alcohol and so forth. And it's a currency border, because there's the euro on one side and sterling on the other. All those things are done electronically. They don't do those at the border.
Technology.
So if we need tariffs as well, you'll do the tariffs in the same way that you do the VAT and you do the do the currency. I can't see what the problem is.
Okay.
I think these people don't understand that we have computers.
Yes.
And that there are authorised economic operators, there are transport firms that know how to do this, and they will send their truckloads across the border, and the authorities on each side will be told electronically about them. They won't need to stop them at the border unless they want to do a random check, because they know the operator, they know what's on the lorry, and they do whatever checks they need, either where they depart from or where they arrive. Well, I would say that it's your battle, it's not mine. I never interfere in other countries' views, and I don't want them interfering in my country's views. But if you are committed to taking France out of the European Union, I would say to you, look at what we're doing. I think we're going to get there. We are going to succeed in doing it. I think we've made it more difficult than we need have done, but that was to do with the balance of Parliament not reflecting the balance of opinion in the country. But the country is still, I think, very strongly of the view that it just wants us to leave, and that should be an inspiration to people in France if they've already decided they want France to leave.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay.